Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, no matter where you are in the world, and welcome back to Sip and Talk.
Welcome back, everyone.
Okay, so today we are definitely starting with the pulse of the macroeconomy. The market lately just feels like a complete roller coaster.
It really does.
And the policy focus, it just keeps shifting. It's gone from inflation to energy, and now it's all about geopolitics.
Yeah.
You know, every time the market has one of these big swings, I just imagine the Fed wanting to hit the mute button on their mic for like 3 minutes just to cool off.
I think they probably do, especially right now. And you're right, the geopolitical heat is really cranking up, which just throws a massive wrench into any of those nice, neat macroeconomic plans.
Totally.
There is so much speculation right now about, the U.S. and Venezuela. Are they on a collision course? Is this going to escalate into something more direct? And look, we're not trying to be crystal ball gazers here, but the mere probability of a conflict, just that feeling of tension in the air, that is more than enough to drive market emotion and completely change how policymakers plan for, well, everything.
Everything from oil supply to regional stability. It's the risk, not the reality, that moves the needle.
Oh, exactly.
And speaking of calculated risk, that leads us right to the ultimate firepower topic, the logic of nuclear deterrence. And it's this frustrating inherent paradox, isn't it? It's supposed to maintain peace, but just by existing, it guarantees this existential risk is always there.
Always.
Which brings us to a question we really want to dig into today. If having the bomb gives you this, ultimate unquestionable security, why do most smaller nations that are facing very real threats like Taiwan or South Korea, why do they choose not to pursue it?
Is the cost.
Is it just the cost? Is it international pressure? Or, and this is the interesting part, does having the bomb actually make you a target instead of making you safe?
That's the exact trajectory we're on today. For all you dedicated Sip and Talkers, we're connecting dots that, you might not have realized were even on the same page.
Okay.
We're starting with the fragile U.S. macro trends, then we'll move into the really difficult policy trade-offs that the Fed and the White House are facing. From there, we'll dissect a major geopolitical flashpoint U.S.-Venezuela, and then finally, we'll get into that underlying nuclear logic and small state strategy.
So the mission here is to show that even in what looks like total global chaos, every single major player, from the Fed in Washington to the government in Caracas, is making these very rigorous, very calculated decisions.
Everyone is calculating.
Okay. Calm, deep breath. Let's get started on that calculation.
Let's do it.
So let's just dive right into the economic vibe here in the U.S. When you look at all the analysis, the consensus seems to be firmly in the just okay category.
Just okay. Not great, not terrible.
Exactly. It's not a roaring success, but we're clearly not in a disaster scenario either. I saw one analyst use the term slightly squishy, which I love.
Squishy.
Yeah, it means things are stable, but they lack any real firmness, right? Well, but the important thing is the likelihood of a major recession seems pretty low.
Fair.
We're just kind of stuck in economic purgatory, not booming, not collapsing.
And that squishiness, that so-called stability is happening despite all these constant pressures, these systemic headwinds.
Right.
I mean, you got businesses and households still dealing with the lingering, almost invisible effects of tariffs. Those just get passed down as higher costs for everybody. And then we've had the market sentiment just get crushed by all those government shutdown scares, which freezes up decision-making. But I think the most persistent, the most structural headwind is still the Federal Reserve's high restrictive interest rate environment.
It's like the financial equivalent of trying to run a marathon with ankle weights on.
That's a perfect way to put it. And you can see that constraint so clearly when you look at the labor market.
Yeah, I was reading what J.P. Morgan's chief investment officer, Bob Michael, said. He called it pause mode.
Pause mode. It's exactly right. I mean, companies are stable, their profits are holding up okay, but they're just not doing that aggressive hiring we saw a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Especially not as we head into the end of the year.
They're just cautious.
Very cautious. And that caution feeds directly into what is arguably the most defining and maybe most dangerous feature of this recovery, the K-shape.
Right.
You really can't talk about U.S. consumer power as this single monolithic thing anymore. The strength in spending, the part everyone sees in the positive GDP numbers, it's concentrated almost entirely in the highest income quintiles.
So the top arm of that K is just soaring. We're talking about the top 20% of earners, the people who hold most of the assets.
Exactly.
They're the ones still buying luxury goods, booking high-end travel, and really feeling the benefits of those rising asset prices.
And meanwhile, The bottom arm of the K is really, really struggling.
Yeah.
Middle and lower income households, they've burned through their excess savings from the pandemic, and now they're facing much higher debt costs because of the Fed's rates. Credit card debt is up, auto loan delinquencies are starting to rise.
That contrast is just so stark. And it really highlights why the resilience we're seeing is resting on what our analysts are calling these three interconnected A pillars.
Yes. And if you knock one of these pillars down, the whole structure could get really unstable, really fast. This is the synthesis of the data we have to focus on. So what are these three A's that are holding up the U.S. economy right now?
Okay, so the whole structure is basically supported by these three things. First, affluent consumers.
Right, as we just said.
They are the biggest, most critical piece of consumption spending.
Yeah.
If they lose confidence and stop spending, the whole service economy just grinds to a halt.
It stalls. Okay, what's number two?
Second is artificial intelligence-driven investment. And this is the tangible stuff. We're talking massive amounts of money pouring into physical infrastructure, data centers, hardware. This isn't just speculative venture capital. It's real construction and manufacturing demand.
Okay, and third A.
And third, asset price gains. So stocks, specifically the S&P 500 and the big tech stocks, and housing prices just continuing to rise, which bolsters the net worth of that top 20%.
And here's where the danger really lies. Because these three A's, they aren't independent variables. They are fundamentally deeply interdependent.
So if you look in that third pillar, asset price gains, and just imagine it starts to wobble, what happens?
Well, if asset prices drop in a major way, the S&P has a big correction, their housing prices deflate, those affluent consumers immediately feel poor.
Right, the classic wealth effect, but in reverse.
Exactly. And the data shows that when wealth declines, even just on paper, high-income consumers pull back their discretionary spending aggressively, and they do it quickly.
And since they're the main engine of consumption in this K-shaped world, if they stop spending, then the AI investment cycle could also slow down, and the whole thing could start to crumble.
That's the fragility. We are relying on the confidence and the asset valuation of a very small, very specific segment of the population.
So it sounds like policymakers have a massive coordination problem. They're trying to support the bottom half of the K without spooking the top half by, say, cutting rates too soon.
Mm-hmm.
So what specific fiscal or legislative relief measures are even on the table to help the bottom half?
Well, we're seeing anticipation for a few major legislative acts, and they're very clearly targeted at getting capital and relief into the hands of lower income groups to try and broaden that base of spending.
So they're trying to fix the K-shape with fiscal policy since the Fed isn't helping with monetary policy.
That's it, exactly.
So I saw some notes about two really interesting pieces of legislation.
Yeah, so there's the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which is expected to provide some specific rebates for things like tips, overtime wages, and maybe for Social Security recipients.
The political goal there is just to boost take-home pay immediately for workers who live paycheck to paycheck.
Right. And then there's the Genius Act, which is also expected to stimulate some broader consumer spending, probably through targeted credits or tax breaks designed to get household spending on mid-range goods.
So the underlying insight here is that these fiscal measures are a political attempt to override that K-shaped fragility without forcing the Fed to cut rates. It just highlights this direct conflict, right? Fiscal policy trying to pump money to the bottom and monetary policy trying to restrict money for everyone.
Absolutely. And then on the regulatory side, we're also expecting a major push toward deregulation. The expectation is that this will start in financial services, and it's aimed at, quote, unleashing the potential of big banks and big business. The theory being that if you reduce regulatory friction, you encourage more investment and efficiency, which in theory should benefit the broader economy.
But as we've learned from, past financial crises, loosening the rules on major financial institutions, well, it might boost short-term growth, but it always carries some pretty severe systemic risks. It's a high-stakes trade-off.
It always is.
Okay, now let's move over to the monetary policy side, the conductor of this whole orchestra, the Fed.
Right. And the volatility we've seen recently wasn't just, typical market movement. The S&P 500 and the NASDAQ 100 experienced some really severe intraday swings, and the VIX just remained stubbornly high.
Okay, wait, VIX. Just for listeners who aren't glued to a ticker all day, VIX is the volatility index, right? The fear gauge.
It is, yeah. Think of it as the market's fear gauge. When the VIX is high, it means the market expects more volatility in the near future. It's a signal of deep uncertainty. For instance, The S&P 500 recently saw its second widest intraday trading range since all the way back in April. That shows a real lack of conviction about where things are headed.
And that lack of conviction is bleeding straight into the rate cut expectations. Earlier this week, the market was pricing in something like a 60% chance of a December rate cut.
Yeah, and that has now plummeted to less than 50%.
Wow.
That swing, a 10-point drop in probability in just a few days, it shows just how unsure investors are about what the Fed is going to do next.
And the Fed itself is staying very, very hawkish, right? Regardless of the mixed data.
Oh, absolutely. Their rhetoric index is at its most hawkish in a month, which shows a consistent commitment to fighting inflation. We just heard from the Kansas City Fed President, Jeff Schmid, who warned that rate cuts right now could actually push inflation higher without really helping the job market.
So he's basically saying, we might ease the pain for the bottom of the K, but we risk wrecking the whole economy with inflation again.
That's the argument. And the Dallas Fed president, Lori Logan, she echoed this. She said outright that she doubts inflation is returning to their 2% target anytime soon, which justifies the current restrictive policy. They are not in a hurry to ease up.
But it's a huge challenge for them because they're operating with this significant data gap.
Yeah.
They're missing some key official economic data, which has to make it harder for them to judge the economy accurately.
It does. They have to rely on secondary, almost anecdotal indicators. Signs of weakness in the labor market, increasing layoffs in certain sectors, consumer credit getting tighter.
But against all that weakness, big corporate earnings have mostly held up pretty well, which suggests the top 10% of the economy is still doing just fine.
And that mixed picture gives the hawks all the ammunition they need to stick with their high-rate stance.
Okay, let's pivot sharply from monetary policy to trade policy, specifically tariffs. We're seeing this quiet but, I think, really significant admission coming from the White House about the real-world cost of tariffs.
It feels like they're essentially backtracking on certain items.
It's a very politically calculated pivot, isn't it? The administration is kind of implicitly acknowledging that tariffs, which were supposed to protect our industries, have actually just pushed up consumer prices on essential goods.
Right. And now they're planning an executive order to cancel or lower tariffs on specific agricultural products that the U.S. just can't produce enough of to meet demand.
And they're targeting very specific, very high visibility items that hit the typical American grocery bill immediately. We're talking about reducing tariffs on things like beef, coffee, bananas, and tomatoes.
This is pure politics responding to sticker shock.
It is.
It is a direct, targeted response to voter frustration over the rising cost of living, especially food. When the cost of your morning coffee and your lunchtime salad goes up every single month, that translates directly into bad polling numbers.
So by providing this targeted relief, they're trying to ease that household pain before the election cycle really heats up, even if it kind of undercuts their broader protectionist trade stance.
That was a small tactical move. Now let's talk about a massive strategic one. This new trade framework with Switzerland, valued at a staggering $200 billion.
This seemed to come completely out of left field, Switzerland. I mean, we usually hear about the EU, China, Japan. What makes this deal so significant?
This is a critical insight into the new nature of U.S. trade strategy. The U.S. is moving away from these big multilateral agreements and towards highly customized bilateral deals where they trade foreign capital commitment directly for tariff relief.
A quid pro quo.
A massive quid pro quo. This deal, reached on November 14th, is based on avoiding tariffs in exchange for securing long-term U.S. investment.
Okay, first, the tariffs. Why did the U.S. have a 39% tariff on Swiss watches in the first place? And what was the concession?
Well, historically, that 39% tariff on certain high-end Swiss goods, including watches, was kind of a relic of past trade negotiations. It was mostly just a punitive tax. So the U.S. agreed to sharply cut those tariffs, including on the iconic watches, from that crippling 39% all the way down to 15%.
That's a huge break for Swiss exporters. It has to completely restore their profitability in the U.S. market.
It does. And the return on that concession is a commitment of $200 billion in investment, which, for a country the size of Switzerland, is an astronomical figure.
It is.
The Swiss private sector, we're talking giants like Roche and Novartis and Pharma, ABB in engineering, Stadler and rail, they've all committed to investing $200 billion in the U.S. by 2028.
And a big chunk of that, $67 billion, is expected by 2026. This is all calculated to balance out the U.S. trade deficit with Switzerland, right?
Exactly. And we should break down where that $200 billion is going, because the specifics are incredibly revealing about U.S. priorities.
I agree. It's highly strategic. It's not just random investment.
Not at all. First, it's going to pharma and healthcare. The Swiss drug companies are expanding U.S. factories, accelerating R&D here. The goal is to stabilize drug prices, localize critical supply chains, and create high-wage jobs.
Okay, so securing the medical supply chain. What else?
Second, advanced manufacturing and machinery. They're shifting sophisticated production lines to the U.S. to boost our domestic competitiveness, especially in specialized machinery you'd find in the industrial Midwest.
And the third one is fascinating to me, gold and precious metals processing.
Isn't it? Switzerland is the global leader in refining. So now Swiss refining technology will be brought here to establish the U.S. as a new major hub for precious metals. It helps the U.S. secure control over high-value commodities.
Okay, what else?
Fourth, aerospace and transportation. Big infrastructure investment in things like railway equipment and components. And fifth, energy and construction, with projects planned across all 50 states to make sure there's broad political support.
So the strategic insight is clear. The U.S. is trading tariff revenue for tangible, long-term capital investment and job creation. It's all about internal investment and supply chain security over these abstract free trade goals. This is the new model.
This is the new model.
Okay, we identified AI investment as one of those three critical pillars holding up the economy, and the sheer scale of it just confirms its transformative role. This capital expenditure shows zero signs of slowing down.
The raw numbers are just staggering. S&P 500 net capital expenditures, CapEx, are estimated to hit $400 billion in Q3 for the very first time.
And let's be clear about what CapEx is here. We are not talking about speculative funding rounds for startups.
No, not at all. CapEx is the money companies spend on acquiring or upgrading physical assets.
Right.
For the AI industry, this means billions of dollars flowing into building concrete data centers, buying specialized cooling systems, and filling server racks with cutting-edge silicon. That $400 billion is physical demand creating jobs in construction, manufacturing, and utilities.
And what makes this wave so different from, say, the dot-com bubble is that this AI expansion is dominated by these deep-pocketed companies, the mega caps. They have the resources to not only build the foundational models, but also to maintain that leadership through sustained CapEx. It's a competition of giants that very few startups can realistically join.
And if AI is the engine driving this CapEx explosion, then NVIDIA is, without a doubt, the star of the show.
Oh, yeah. All market attention is glued to their upcoming earnings release next Wednesday. It really is the Super Bowl for the semiconductor market this quarter.
And the market isn't just going to look at revenue. They'll be scrutinizing a few very specific forward-looking metrics.
Right. What are they?
Precisely. Analysts are going to look at the size of NVIDIA's own CapEx. How much are they investing in their own capacity? And they'll want insight into the demand for their new hardware, especially the JB300 chip.
Which isn't just a faster processor. This is their next-gen unit, right? It's crucial for running these huge, complex, generative AI models. If demand for the JB300 is strong, it means the whole AI pipeline is humming.
Exactly. And critically, the CapEx expectations from the hyperscalers, the Amazons, Googles, and Microsofts of the world, that's the real indicator.
Right. They're NVIDIA's biggest customers.
And those hyperscalers are projected to hit a staggering $90 billion in collective capital expenditure by 2026. If they're investing that much, it validates the long-term structural belief in AI growth.
But that incredible scale of CapEx, while it's transformative, it is now creating this massive, almost invisible pressure point, the power grid. This is a quiet crisis under the whole AI boom.
It absolutely is. AI data centers require just staggering amounts of electricity. This surge in demand is causing huge challenges for utility companies all over the world.
I saw an example with ComEd in Illinois.
Yeah, ComEd covers a massive area, and their electricity load growth is now expected to rise by 2 to 4% in the next 5 to 10 years, just because of AI demand. For utility planners who usually deal with tiny fractional increases, that is a colossal sudden spike they are just not prepared for.
And this energy crunch is forcing the tech giants to basically become their own energy providers to mitigate the risks.
Exactly. Alphabet Google is investing $40 billion in 3 new data centers in Texas by 2027. And one of those facilities is designed specifically with integrated solar and battery storage.
So not just for reliability, but mainly to reduce the massive impact on the public grid. They have to solve the power problem themselves.
They do. And the utilities are fighting back to protect consumers from the financial risk.
How so?
They're getting smarter about financial regulation.
Yeah.
ComEd, for instance, now requires these massive developers to put down cash or a letter of credit as a substantial deposit before they'll even start the expensive grid upgrades.
And the whole point of that is to prevent something called stranded investment risk. Can you elaborate on that for us?
The concept is actually simple, but it's vital. Imagine a utility spends billions upgrading substations and transmission lines to serve a developer's huge new data center.
Okay.
Then 3 years later, the developer cancels the project. Maybe there's a market downturn or a technology shift. The utility, and ultimately all its other rate-paying consumers, would be stuck paying for those expensive, now useless upgrades.
Ah, got it. So the deposit makes sure the developers carry the financial risk for their own massive energy demand. It's a clear signal that the AI energy crunch is now being priced into the cost of infrastructure.
That's it.
Now let's transition from the calculated risk of CapEx and utility planning to the calculated risk of military strategy, specifically this flashpoint between the U.S. and Venezuela.
Right. So the U.S. has concentrated a lot of military assets in the region under the official name Operation Southern Spear.
And the stated target is supposedly drug cartels and narco-terrorism, but when I hear that, and then I see the kind of assets they've deployed, the story doesn't quite add up.
You're right to be skeptical. The key asset they've deployed is the Advanced Nuclear Aircraft Carrier, the USS Gerald R. Ford.
The Navy's newest and most capable carrier.
Yep. Arriving in the U.S. Southern Command area with 9 air squadrons and ballistic missile destroyers.
Military analysts have pointed out that a force that
They do. And that sentiment is supported by some internal pressures within the U.S. administration pushing for strikes to oust President Nicolás Maduro because they believe the regime is fragile enough to collapse under that kind of pressure.
So if Caracas is reacting so strongly, mobilizing their troops and calling it an imperialist threat, why isn't this high-stakes buildup causing chaos in the global markets like other flashpoints do, like tensions in the Middle East or on the Korean Peninsula?
That is the crucial distinction.
Yeah.
Our analysis shows that the U.S.-Venezuela tension has a very low direct correlation with the recent broader stock market pullback.
Right.
That volatility, like we talked about, is driven by AI valuation fears and uncertainty about the Fed. Venezuela just isn't a core part of the global manufacturing or financial supply chain in the same way that Taiwan is.
So where is the market impact actually being felt?
It primarily hits 2 very specific markets. The oil market, because Venezuela is a major oil producer, even if they're operating way below capacity, and Venezuelan sovereign debt. It's a regional shock that rattles commodities, but it's not a global systemic shock.
And how has Maduro's regime responded to the USS Ford showing up?
Maduro ordered a massive military mobilization. They're planning large-scale land, sea, and air exercises to show their own capability and resolve, hoping to deter any possible action. They've also strengthened defenses and, a bit ominously, urged citizens to monitor their neighbors for any potential U.S.-related activities or internal dissent. It's a very public display of national defense.
And the calculus for any kind of intervention is further complicated by external alliances.
Absolutely. Russia and Cuba are key players here. They're providing critical intelligence and weapons support. That significantly strengthens Maduro's defenses and really complicates the math for any outside intervention. Analysts are strongly warning that if the U.S. did attempt a regime change invasion, the conflict could devolve into a really complex, prolonged guerrilla war, given the regime's decades of entrenched loyalty.
So, given the high cost, the legal concerns, the distraction from other strategic areas, full-scale war is considered pretty low probability. If they aren't planning an invasion, what is the strategy behind Operation Southern Spear?
It's best characterized as extreme pressure. It's like a 21st century economic siege, or what strategists call salami slicing.
Salami slicing.
Yeah. The goal isn't outright invasion. It's to apply overwhelming but non-committal military and economic pressure to force an internal collapse or defections, or at least major concessions from the Maduro regime.
But the risk remains high for targeted strikes.
It does. Things like hitting specific drug-running vessels or military sites as a way to apply maximum pain and accelerate that internal pressure. It's a very, very high-stakes game of calculated brinkmanship.
Shifting from that very specific conventional military pressure to the ultimate form of deterrence, let's unpack the logic that drives the most powerful nations. Mutual assured destruction. MAD.
Right. MAD is that chilling but elegant principle that a nuclear war between two major powers would just inevitably result in the total destruction of both sides.
Which means structurally, there can be no winner.
And that structural inability to win is precisely what creates stability. Nuclear weapons are the ultimate security blanket. They're not meant to be used, but their existence is meant to ensure a nation is never attacked or conquered by military force.
It's the great paradox, isn't it? The weapon is so catastrophic that its very power makes it unusable. But because it's unusable, its mere existence acts as the strongest possible deterrent against total war between nuclear states. It's a safety mechanism built on the capacity for total annihilation.
And given that foundational paradox, why do nations even pursue nuclear weapons? I mean, we see 5 core strategic motivations that consistently drive this, usually by major powers or very ambitious regional actors.
Okay, let's run through them. What's the first?
First, the absolute anchor. Ultimate security guaranteed by MAD. It ensures your national survival by making an attack on your homeland fundamentally unthinkable for a rival.
Right. And second is enhanced international status. Owning nuclear weapons is seen as the undeniable mark of a great power. I mean, look at the UN Security Council. The 5 permanent members are all declared nuclear states.
It gives you immense influence on global security issues, a louder voice in all the negotiations.
And the third reason is the most compelling for nations that are facing a huge gap in conventional military might.
Yes. The third is balancing superpower threats. For a state facing a much larger military thinkers, India versus China, or even Cold War France versus the Soviet Union, nuclear weapons provide an asymmetric advantage.
It levels the playing field.
It does. It forces the conventionally stronger opponent to consider existential catastrophic risks before acting, even in a conventional way. It stops them from just using their bigger army to get what they want.
Okay, fourth is about control and independence, right? Strategic autonomy.
Exactly. If you develop your own deterrent, it reduces your dependency on an ally's nuclear umbrella, like the one the U.S. extends to NATO or South Korea.
So you don't have to fully kowtow to your protector state. It gives you much more independent foreign policy latitude.
You can make decisions that might displease your allies without fearing the immediate loss of your security guarantee.
And the final reason is the one that's the most self-perpetuating, the one that drives the whole proliferation chain reaction.
That's the fifth one, preventing nuclear proliferation chain reaction. It's a self-preservation impulse. When one country, say Iran, gets the bomb or gets close to it, its regional rivals like Saudi Arabia or Turkey feel this extreme, immediate pressure to do the same thing for their own survival.
It's the spiral of deterrence. One acquisition justifies the next.
So the nuclear paradox, summarized, is this. The tremendous value of the weapon lies entirely in its potential existence, not its actual use. Its catastrophic power prevents its use, and because of that unique power, its presence acts as the strongest possible deterrent against a major global war.
Which brings us full circle to that central question. If mentality works so perfectly for the big powers, why do small nations facing clear existential threats like Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, choose not to develop nuclear weapons? Why do they willingly live with that risk of conventional asymmetry?
The answer is that for a small, non-nuclear state, the cost and the risk of developing the bomb far outweigh the benefits of owning it. The physics of deterrence just doesn't scale down easily. These small states face 5 major, often fatal constraints that a country like the US or Russia just doesn't have to worry about.
Okay, so let's start with the immediate danger, the trigger. What analysts call the red line.
That's constraint number 1. Immediate and fatal military intervention risk. The most dangerous period for any aspiring nuclear nation is the development phase, before the weapon is fully tested, miniaturized, and securely deployable.
Right.
For a country like Taiwan, openly pursuing nuclear weapons would be treated as the de facto declaration of independence by China.
Which would immediately risk a devastating preemptive conventional military strike or massive sanctions before the deterrent even becomes a reality.
The very attempt to gain ultimate security through the bomb would actually trigger the exact conflict they're trying to deter.
So we see North Korea survive this attempt. Why can't a state like Taiwan do the same?
The key difference is economic integration versus isolation. North Korea was already an international pariah. It had virtually nothing left to lose in the global economy. Taiwan, on the other hand, is a global trade nexus. It is entirely dependent on international trade routes, supply chains, financial systems. Taiwan cannot afford the immediate, fatal economic siege and military response that would come with crossing that red line.
And beyond that immediate military threat, there's the devastating diplomatic cost.
That's constraint number 2. Loss of the nuclear umbrella and diplomatic pressure. Threatened small states, especially U.S. allies like South Korea and Japan, rely heavily on the U.S. security guarantee.
So if they developed their own bomb, they'd be in direct violation of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT.
And the consequence of that. The U.S. and other nuclear powers would apply immense diplomatic and economic pressure. They could cut off vital conventional military aid, technical cooperation, and, critically, intelligence sharing.
For those nations, losing the support of their strongest military and economic ally is a debilitating blow that just outweighs any perceived gain in self-security.
And then we get into the sheer scale of the technical and financial hurdles.
Constraint number 3, severe technical and economic barriers.
Building a nuclear weapon is monumentally expensive and complex. It requires vast long-term funding, highly specialized people, and complex, secure facilities for refining nuclear fuel. Just setting up the centrifuges and labs is a decade-long, multi-billion-dollar endeavor.
And you can't really hide the acquisition of the materials either.
No. The International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, has very strict regulations and scrutiny. It makes secretly getting the necessary fissionable materials incredibly difficult and high risk.
And even if you manage to build a warhead, you still need reliable, expensive delivery systems, right? Like long-range ballistic missiles that can survive an attack. Without those, the whole thing is kind of pointless.
It is, which ties directly into the core requirement for MD to even function.
Yeah.
The ability to guarantee retaliation.
Which brings us to constraint number 4, lack of second strike capability.
Right. MD requires you to be able to survive a massive first strike and then reliably launch a retaliatory strike. Small states just don't have the strategic depth for dispersal. Their limited nuclear arsenal and command centers would all be concentrated in a tiny geographic area.
Meaning
Their entire retaliatory capability could be completely wiped out in a large-scale conventional or nuclear first strike by the enemy.
And if the enemy knows they can take out your entire arsenal in the first salvo, your nuclear deterrent is invalid. It doesn't deter. It actually makes a preemptive strike a much more attractive, feasible option for the enemy.
Exactly. And finally, there's the internal opposition factor. Constraint 5. This is especially true in open democracies.
Constraint number 5, domestic political and public opposition.
Yeah. In democratic societies like Taiwan or South Korea, there would be massive domestic opposition. The public would raise immediate, serious concerns over safety, the environment, think nuclear waste, potential accidents, and the elevated risk of nuclear war.
Plus, the sheer scale of the development would drain enormous funds away from civilian budgets, healthcare, and even essential conventional defense, causing extreme political blowback.
And the case of Taiwan perfectly illustrates all of these constraints in action.
Right. They had a secret program for a while.
They did. From the 1960s to the 1980s. They were close, but not quite there. And then in 1988, the whole program was forcefully terminated after a key defection. A colonel named Chiang Shen-yi fled to the U.S. and revealed everything.
Which triggered a direct and swift U.S. intervention.
Oh, yeah. The U.S. military supervised the dismantling of the facilities, the destruction of documents, and the removal of all nuclear materials. The U.S. made it abundantly clear that Taiwan would not be allowed to develop this capability.
And their official policy today is just a clear acknowledgement of that history and those constraints.
Their policy is crystal clear. No production, no development, no acquisition of nuclear weapons technology. They stick to a conventional deterrence strategy, backed by the U.S. security umbrella, because they recognize that trying to build their own bomb carries an unacceptable risk of immediate fatal intervention from both the U.S. and China.
So as we wrap up this extensive sip and talk, we've really tracked the complex logic that connects all these seemingly disparate global events.
We have. We started by dissecting the structural fragility of that K-shaped economy and its narrow reliance on the confidence of affluent consumers, AI investment, and asset prices.
Right. Then we analyzed the delicate policy trade-offs facing the Fed stuck between fighting inflation and addressing the need for fiscal relief, and the White House's move toward targeted tariff cuts and big strategic trade deals like that $200 billion Swiss framework.
We moved from economics to geopolitics, looking at the high-stakes military pressure the U.S. is applying in Latin America with Operation Southern Spear, characterizing it as a strategic, non-committal siege designed to force internal collapse, not an outright invasion.
And finally, we dissected that careful calculus behind nuclear deterrence, understanding why it guarantees survival for big powers, but poses a fatal immediate risk for small, vulnerable states because of all those technical and political constraints.
At the end of the day, everything we discussed, whether it's managing a $400 billion portfolio, negotiating a tariff, or deploying a nuclear carrier, it all comes down to managing risk.
Every major player is engaged in a calculated attempt to secure a position and manage what they see as existential risks.
And our goal here is always to give you, the listener, objective facts and the necessary strategic context so you can do your own independent thinking and see the calculation behind all the global chaos.
Exactly. And to leave you with a final thought to mull over, one that connects the AI, power, and security themes we explored today. If the nuclear age was defined by nations competing for uranium and missile silos, is the new age defined by competing for gigawatts and cooling capacity?
That's fascinating. I mean, given that massive AI infrastructure is now a core pillar of economic resilience, and it requires this unprecedented continuous power generation, think about those 2 to 4% utility load increases globally.
Yeah.
How might the control and distribution of energy resources become the next critical non-proliferation flashpoint? We could be shifting from worrying about a missile gap to worrying about a power stability gap.
It changes the entire definition of national security. Control the grid, control the future.
As always, we do need to stress that we are not financial advisors or investment experts. We're simply providing objective facts and analysis for discussion without prejudice or criticism toward any nation or group.
Thank you so much for joining us on this essential Sip and Talk.
Please remember to subscribe to the Sip and Talk podcast. And for a bit of fun and some great memes and travel vlogs, check out our old friend Mickey at Mickytolife on YouTube.
We'll catch you next time.